My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 29 years old, and on the night I closed on my first home, the one I saved 4 years for, the one I stayed up until 2 in the morning budgeting spreadsheet by spreadsheet, to afford my parents were boarding a flight to Milan. Not because of an emergency. Not because of a death in the family. Because my brother needed someone to hold his hand while he networked at a design conference he'd convinced our father to fund. I stood in the driveway of a small yellow house in Raleigh, North Carolina, holding a key I'd earned entirely on my own, and I called my mom. She let it ring to voicemail. I called my dad. He picked up on the third ring, distracted, the sound of an airport terminal humming behind him. "Proud of you, sweetheart," he said. "Send us pictures." The connection cut before I could answer. That was the night I stopped pretending. That was also the night I started paying attention. I'm a CPA at a mid-size accounting firm. My entire job is noticing what doesn't add up. Numbers don't lie. Patterns don't lie. People do. And for 29 years, I had let my family's version of our story go completely unaudited. That ended the night I stood alone in a driveway, with a key in my hand, and no one to hand flowers to. Before I tell you what I found when I started looking, and what happened at my brother's engagement party 6 weeks later, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized, all at once, that a story you'd been telling yourself your whole life was just the version someone else needed you to believe? I want to know where you're listening from, and whether this sounds familiar. Growing up in Charlotte, our family had a brand. That's the only word for it. My father, Richard Donovan, is a commercial real estate developer. He coaches youth basketball on Sundays, serves on the church board, shakes hands in a way that makes strangers feel like they've known him for years. He builds things for a living and talks about legacy like it's a product he's currently manufacturing. My mother, Susan, taught kindergarten for 15 years before she retired early to manage my father's office. She is soft-spoken, conflict-averse, and deeply skilled at making peace with things she should not be making peace with. Then there's my brother, Marcus. 3 years younger than me, effortlessly charming, blessed with my father's jawline, and a complete inability to finish anything he starts. He bounced through 2 colleges, 3 majors, and 4 business ideas that my parents funded with the cheerful optimism of people who have never read a single business plan. When Marcus wanted to study graphic design in New York, my father paid the full tuition and flew out to help him move in. When Marcus decided New York wasn't for him and pivoted to freelance photography in Austin, my father co-signed his lease and bought him a camera kit worth more than my first car. I took out loans. I worked part-time through college. I graduated with honors from NC State, passed all 4 CPA sections on my first attempt, and heard my father say, at my graduation dinner, that I'd always been the capable one. He meant it as a compliment. I understand now that it was also an excuse. My parents had one rule they repeated often enough that it became wallpaper in our house. We don't play favorites. Both kids are equal. Family first. Always. They said it at holidays. They said it when relatives asked. My dad said it in a profile piece the Charlotte Observer ran about his firm 2 years ago, which I have now read approximately 37 times with very different eyes. When I got engaged to my boyfriend James last spring, he's a high school soccer coach, steadier and kinder than anyone I've ever known. I sat down with my parents to talk finances. I'd been saving for a down payment for 3 years. I had 80% of what I needed. My father, without any prompting, opened a conversation I hadn't started. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Your mother and I talked. We want to match whatever you've saved. It's what we'd do for Marcus, and we want to be fair." He said the word fair. "I want you to remember that." I didn't ask him to say it, he offered. I cried a little, which I'm embarrassed about now, not because it was wrong to feel moved, but because I believed him so completely. I went home and told James. We started looking at neighborhoods. We built a budget around a number that included my parents' contribution. We found the yellow house in Raleigh and moved our timeline up because the numbers finally worked. 2 weeks before closing, I called my father to talk logistics, transfer timing, whether to wire directly to the attorney or route it through my account. He got quiet in a way that didn't register for me right away because I wasn't listening for it yet. He cleared his throat. "Sweetheart, about that. There's been a development with Marcus's launch. He's presenting at a design summit in Milan. This could be a real turning point for him. Your mother and I are flying out to support him. And the money we had to move some things around to cover the trip and to put some capital behind his portfolio launch. I didn't say anything for several seconds. I was running calculations the way I always do under stress, unconsciously, just numbers moving through my head like ticker tape. So the money isn't there, I said. It's just delayed, he said. You'll be fine. You've always figured it out. That's your gift. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for 45 minutes, not crying, just very still. Then I called the mortgage broker, moved $80,000 from my emergency fund and a retirement account I hadn't planned to touch, paid the penalty on the withdrawal, renegotiated 2 line items in the closing agreement, and made the numbers work without him. I closed on the house on a Tuesday afternoon with James beside me and a key that felt both incredible and hollow at the same time. That night, standing alone in my new driveway while James went to get food, my dad's voicemail waited on my phone. Proud of you, sweetheart. Send us pictures. I didn't send pictures. Instead, I drove to my new house every day for a week after work, sat in the empty living room on a folding chair, and thought. Not about the money, not exactly, about the pattern. Because here's the thing about being an accountant. You're trained not just to spot errors, but to ask why the error exists in the first place. Was this a one-time adjustment, or was it a practice? Was this a delayed contribution, or was this just what my parents had always done, and I'd simply never had a dollar amount attached to it before? I started keeping notes. Not dramatically, just a running document in my phone's notes app titled Timeline. I wrote down every memory I could find where Marcus had received something I'd had to provide for myself. The camera, the New York move, the Austin lease, the Italy conference, the delay on my down payment. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it the way you run a reconciliation at the end of the quarter, just to see if the books balanced. They did not balance. Then, about 3 weeks after I closed on the house, my mother called with news. Her voice had that particular brightness that means she's been rehearsing the delivery. Marcus is engaged. Her name is Priya. They met in Austin. She's lovely. And they want to do an engagement party in Charlotte at the club in 6 weeks. Of course you and James are invited. And Marcus wants you to say a few words. You're so good with words, Claire. I held the phone to my ear and looked at the wall in my new living room, still bare of everything except a single nail where I'd planned to hang a mirror. Of course, I said. I'd love to. Priya, I should tell you, had reached out to me directly the week before. She'd found me on Instagram, sent a long, warm message, saying she'd heard so much about me, that Marcus always described me as the brilliant sister, that she was nervous about the family and hoped we could talk. She sounded genuine and a little uncertain, and I liked her immediately for both things. We had coffee over video call the following Saturday. She was funny and sharp and studying for her LSAT while working as a paralegal. She asked me questions about Marcus that suggested she was still figuring out who he really was underneath the charm, which I respected. When she asked how our parents were, I paused just a beat too long. They're very supportive of Marcus, I said. She tilted her head slightly. And of you? I smiled. They think very highly of capable people. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, quietly, I get the sense, there's something there. I told her I'd talk to her more at the party. Now here is where I need to stop and ask you something, because I want you to make this call with me. If someone handed you a microphone in front of a room full of your family, your parents' oldest friends, your father's business contacts, and your brother's new fiancé, and you had every piece of documentation you needed, would you say the polite thing? Or would you finally say the true thing? Tell me what time it is where you're listening from, because I want to know how far this story travels. I did not go into this planning a scene. That's important to understand. Accountants don't create chaos. We expose discrepancies. There's a difference. In the 3 weeks between agreeing to speak and the party, I did not fabricate a single thing. I just organized what already existed. I created a file on my laptop. I labeled it Family, First, Audit, PDF. Inside it, I put a timeline document, a screenshot of every bank notification I'd received, showing the closing delays and the penalty withdrawal, the text thread where my father said the money had been moved around for Marcus's trip, a copy of the Observer article where he talked about treating both his children equally, and this is the one that changed things, a document I had not gone looking for but that found its way to me anyway. It came from my cousin Rachel, who works in my father's office part-time doing administrative work. She texted me one evening without explanation, just a forwarded email between my father and his financial advisor dated the same week as our down payment conversation. The subject line was REQ, 2 discretionary reallocation. The body said, moving the Donovan Kids Contribution Fund, the combined savings earmarked for both Claire and Marcus life events. Pulling Claire's designated portion into the Milan trip and Marcus's portfolio launch. Note for records. Claire's closing timeline gives us flexibility to circle back. She doesn't know the designated amounts by name. There was a fund, a specific, named fund, money set aside for both of us by name, that my parents had quietly rerouted without telling me it existed in the first place. The matching contribution he'd offered me wasn't generosity, it was my own designated money. And he'd taken it back. I sat with that email for a long time. Then I added it to the file. James found me at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock that night. He sat down without asking and read over my shoulder. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't have to do anything with this." "I know," I said. He said, "But you're going to." I looked at him. I love my husband for many reasons, but one of the chief ones is that he has never once told me how to feel about my own family. "I've let them write the story for 29 years, I said. "I've been the capable one, the grateful one, the one who figures it out. At some point, figuring it out stops being a compliment and starts being a warning label they put on me so they never have to show up." He reached over and closed my laptop gently. "Whatever you decide," he said. "I'm the one standing next to you." I wore a dress the color of deep burgundy to the engagement party. It was not an accident. The club my parents had booked was the kind of place with dark wood paneling and framed photos of golf tournaments. A long table ran down the center of the private room, with my parents at one end, Marcus and Priya at the other, and about 40 guests arranged in between. My father's business partner was there. 2 of his oldest clients, Marcus's college friends. Priya's parents, who had flown in from Houston and looked slightly overwhelmed by the energy in the room. My mother hugged me at the door and held on a beat too long. "You look beautiful," she said. "Just keep it light tonight, okay? Happy occasion." I kissed her cheek. "I'm going to speak from the heart," I told her. My father shook James's hand and told him the house sounded like a great investment. He didn't mention the closing. He didn't mention the money. He moved on to the next guest, the way he moves through any room, like a man who's very good at editing in real time. Marcus grabbed me in a hug and said, "See, you're going to kill it tonight." He'd always called me C. I hugged him back and felt something complicated in my chest, something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but was in the neighborhood of both. Priya caught my eye over his shoulder. I gave her a small nod. We'd spoken again 2 days before the party. I had told her, plainly, that there were some things she should probably know before she married into this family. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. She went quiet. Then she said, "I want to know the whole truth. Whatever it is." She wasn't asking me to spare her. I respected her more for it. I had emailed myself the documents. I had my phone. The club had a flat screen mounted on the wall for presentations, connected to a laptop the event coordinator had shown me during setup earlier that afternoon. I'd asked, quietly, whether I could load a photo slideshow for the toast. She'd said yes, absolutely, and handed me the HDMI cable herself. Dinner was warm and loud and full of the surface ease my parents have always been skilled at generating. Marcus talked about his portfolio, his plans, his vision. He was charming in the way he always is, the kind of charming that makes you root for him even when you know better. Priya laughed at the right moments and held his hand and kept glancing at me across the table, with something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. When dessert plates were cleared, My father stood and said a few words about legacy and investment, and watching his son find his person. He said the word family 7 times. I counted. Then he sat down, looked at me, and said, "Claire, I believe you have a few words for your brother and his beautiful fiancée." I stood up. The room settled. I plugged in my phone. "For those who don't know me," I said, "I'm Claire, Marcus's older sister. I'm a CPA. I spend my days looking at numbers and figuring out what they actually mean versus what they're being presented to mean. I've been doing that for other people's finances for 7 years. I only recently started applying it to my own family." A few polite chuckles. My mother's smile stayed fixed. My father tilted his head slightly, the way he does when something doesn't match his expected script. I pressed the button on my phone, and the flat screen behind me came to life. A photo of Marcus and me as kids, probably 8 and 5 years old, making sandcastles at the beach. Warm, simple, unobjectionable. I'd put it first on purpose. "Marcus, you've always had a gift for getting people to believe in you," I said. "And I don't say that unkindly. I have believed in you. Our parents have believed in you, financially and consistently, and I want Priya's family to understand the full picture of how this family operates before she signs anything legal." The room shifted. I heard a chair creak. The screen changed. A clean timeline. Dates on the left, descriptions on the right. I talked through it slowly, the way I'd present a client's financial history. Not angry, not rushed. Marcus's New York tuition, fully covered. Austin lease, co-signed, first and last month paid. Camera equipment, referenced by the exact dollar amount from a receipt my cousin had found while filing old documents. The Milan trip, the conference registration, the hotel. On the right side of the ledger, my column, student loans, part-time jobs, my own apartment deposit, my own car, my own CPA exam fees, paid 5 times over, because I failed one section and had to retake it and couldn't afford the prep course the second time. "I'm not presenting this to make anyone feel guilty," I said. "I'm presenting it because there is a word for a ledger that is this consistently one-sided, and that word is not equal." My father shifted in his seat. His jaw had tightened. "Claire," he said, in that low warning voice I'd heard my entire childhood. I raised a hand. "I'm almost there, Dad." The screen changed again. The Observer article, his photo, the quote pulled out and enlarged. "At Mitchell, I caught myself at Donovan Real Estate. We believe in building things that last. That starts at home. Both my kids have grown up knowing that hard work is rewarded equally, without favoritism. Legacy means treating everyone you love with the same investment." The screen shifted one more time. The email, my father's name, his financial advisor's name, the subject line, the body, zoomed in on one line. I read it aloud. "Claire's closing timeline gives us flexibility to circle back. She doesn't know the designated amounts by name." The room went completely silent. Priya's father, who had been pleasant and quiet all evening, put down his wineglass and leaned forward. He read the screen the way you read something you want to make sure you're reading correctly. His wife put her hand on his arm. My father was on his feet. "That email is out of context," he said. "There's a full conversation around that. There was a fund," I said, still calm, "with both our names on it. Money specifically set aside for life events for me and Marcus. When I was buying my first home, I asked you about a contribution you had offered. You told me the money had to be moved for Marcus's trip. What you didn't tell me was that the money you moved was already mine. You withdrew from a tax-deferred account to make closing," Priya said suddenly. Her voice was very quiet. "You told me you dipped into savings because the timing was tough." I looked at her. "Yes." She looked at Marcus. "You told me your sister was fine. That she had plenty and didn't need the family contribution." Marcus's face did something complicated. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "I didn't say that," he said finally. "Dad," Priya said, turning to her own father now. "This is the email I mentioned to you yesterday." Priya's father nodded slowly, his expression closed and careful. He looked at my father. "Richard," he said, I think we need to have a different conversation about what this partnership is going to look like. My father turned to him, and for the first time in my life, I watched the practiced ease leave his face entirely. The polish, the handshake warmth, the legacy language, all of it slid off like something that had only ever been sitting on the surface. "This is a private family matter," he said. "You made it a partnership matter when you asked us to co-invest in Marcus's studio launch," Priya's father said. "We'll revisit that conversation with full information." My mother was crying. Quietly, not dramatically, the way she cries when she knows she can't argue her way out of something. She reached toward me across the table. "Sweetheart," she said. I looked at her. "Mom," I said, and my voice dropped to something gentler than everything else I'd said tonight. "I know you love me. I know you believe that. I am telling you that love without follow-through is not the same thing as support. And I needed support when it mattered, not compliments on how well I manage without it." Marcus stood up. His face was flushed. "See, come on. You're doing this here, tonight?" I looked at my brother, and this was the part I had thought about most. Because I don't hate Marcus, he didn't invent this dynamic. He was handed it the same way I was, just from the more comfortable side. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I'm doing this because Priya asked me to tell the truth. And because I have spent my whole life being the easy one, the low-maintenance one, the one who handles it. I am telling you that there is a cost to that. And the cost was real, and it had a number, and I have the receipts." He sat back down. He didn't say anything else. I turned back to the room. I set the microphone on the table. The screen behind me had gone back to that first photo, the two of us making sand castles, 5 and 8 years old, squinting into the sun. "Priya," I said, "I hope you get the family you deserve. I mean that without any condition attached." Then I walked to where James was sitting, not dramatically, no slammed door. Just two people who had said what needed to be said and didn't need to watch the cleanup. In the car, James drove. I looked out the passenger window at the streetlights and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, not relief, something more like the particular quiet after you've finished a very long reconciliation and the numbers finally match. The work is done, the record is accurate. Whatever anyone does with it next is no longer your problem to manage. My phone started within the hour. My mother, 3 times. My father, once. A text from Marcus that just said we need to talk. I put the phone face down in the cup holder and watched the highway. Over the following 2 weeks, I learned the consequences piece by piece, the way you learn most things in accounting through secondary reports and the people who forward you information without quite explaining why. Priya's father withdrew his stake in Marcus's studio launch. The co-investment that had been in discussion for months collapsed quietly. Marcus had to scale back significantly and take on freelance contract work to bridge the gap. He called me twice, the second time without hostility, just sounding tired, and said, "I didn't know about the fund. See, I want you to know that. I didn't know there was a designated account, or that they'd moved your portion. I believed them when they said you were fine." I believe that he believed that. It doesn't undo the years, but it changes the texture of them slightly. He's not innocent, but he was also not the architect. My father lost a client. One of his longest-running commercial accounts, a developer who'd been at the party, sent a formal notice through the firm's business email about 36 hours later. "Professional reasons," the letter said. But Rachel forwarded me a note that the developer had told 2 mutual contacts he simply didn't trust a man whose public messaging and private behavior were that far apart. My parents went through what my mother described, in a voicemail I listened to 3 times, as a very difficult period of reflection. She said she wanted to explain. She said she'd always meant to circle back. She used the word timing so many times it lost all meaning. Then she said something that surprised me. She said, "I've been thinking about the Observer article, about what your father said, and I think we let ourselves believe a story about our family that we hadn't actually earned." I didn't call her back right away. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I needed to sit with it and figure out whether there was a version of this that included going forward together, and what that would honestly require. I'm still figuring that out. I won't rush it. James and I spent the weekend after the party painting the living room of the yellow house, a warm terracotta color I'd picked out months earlier and never had the emotional space to get to. We put on music and rolled paint and ordered Thai food, and James got a streak of burnt orange on his left ear that he didn't notice until the next morning. It was one of the best evenings of my life. The mirror I'd been waiting to hang went up Sunday afternoon. I stood in front of it and looked at the living room reflected back. The color we'd chosen, the furniture we'd saved for, the house that exists because I did not wait for someone else to make it possible. If you've ever been told you're the capable one as a substitute for being supported, I want you to hear this. Capable is not a personality trait you were born with. It's a skill you developed in the space where care was supposed to be. You built that. And you are allowed to stop treating your own resilience as a reason you deserve less. People who hear this story sometimes say, I went too far, that family business should stay private, that an engagement party was the wrong place. Maybe for their family. In my family, the wrong place was the Observer article. The wrong place was every conversation where my father described our family as equal in front of people whose opinions he cared about while privately running two completely different ledgers. I didn't create the public record. I just added an accurate footnote. Here's what I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago. Accountability isn't cruelty. Telling the truth about what happened to you is not the same as attacking someone. And the day you stop auditing your own family's version of your story and start running the numbers yourself is the day you find out who you actually are when no one is managing your self-image for you. I turned out to be someone who closes on her own house, hangs her own mirror, and finally says out loud what the ledger has always shown. So I'll ask you one last time. If you were standing in that room with every receipt, every email, every documented date in your hands, would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Or would you have handed them the mic and finally let the numbers speak? I want to know where you're listening from. And I want to know if you've ever been the capable one in a family that mistook your endurance for contentment. Tell me your story. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in an empty driveway with a key in their hand, and they need to know they're not the only one who finally stopped waiting for the celebration. Someone else promised and threw their own.